Live button. So let's wait for the stream to fire up all across the beautiful internet. Then we're going to get started. We're going to be wrapping up a lot today. We got a lot to get to. Let's wait. And YouTube looks like we're alive and well. So let's get started. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have represented thousands of good people facing criminal charges. And throughout our time in practice, we have seen a lot of problems with our justice system. I'm talking about misconduct involving the police. We have prosecutors behaving poorly. We have judges not particularly interested in a little thing called justice. And it all starts with the politicians, the people at the top, the ones who write the rules and pass the laws that they expect you and me to follow, but sometimes have a little bit of difficulty doing so themselves. That's why we started this show called Watching the Watchers, so that together with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency back down upon our very system with the hope of finding justice. And we're grateful that you are with us today. We've got a lot to get into. We've got the final day of evidence in the Derek Chauvin case. We had closing arguments, closing remarks from both the prosecution and the defense, and we have some fireworks that took place after all of that occurred today. Many people thought as soon as Eric Nelson sat down, that was it. Well, no, the government had a rebuttal closing. Then we had some tense moments after the closing arguments as Eric Nelson moved for a mistrial. So I want to break down what happened there. Then we're going to change gears a little bit and talk about Officer Brian Sicknick. Been following this story ever since January 6th. Been a little bit critical about what is going on with this whole investigation. Been wondering for 3 months now over that, what actually killed Brian Sicknick, because we saw that his name was being bandied about by people who wanted to make a political point. We saw that his name came up in the Democrats' trial brief during their impeachment of Donald Trump, and the list goes on. Well, we learned today that he wasn't killed by the MAGA maniac mob or whatever they're calling it now. He died by natural causes. So we got to break down what happened there. And then before we wrap up with the broadcast today, we got to finish by talking about aliens. Space aliens, not the other ones, the people coming across the border. We're talking about UFOs because I'm not kidding you. The Pentagon is confirming that some new imagery that we're seeing, some new videos, is in fact authentic. What does it mean to be authentic is a whole separate question. But we have some really strange things flying around our atmosphere these days, and our government is actually confirming this. And there is a report that is due to be delivered to Congress by our intelligence agencies here in June, summarizing all of the things that they're seeing out there floating around the skies. So it's an actual thing. We're actually going to be talking about aliens and UFOs because our government is now checking this stuff out. So we've got a lot to get into. Before we do get into it, of course, want to invite you to be a part of the show. We're going to take questions in between every one of those segments. And if you want to ask a question, leave a comment, throw out a criticism, feel free to do that. You can do that over on our locals.com platform. So go over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com. You can sign up to be a part of the show. You can also get a free copy of my book. It's called Beginning to Winning. It's also available on Amazon. It's how to fight your case and succeed in the criminal justice system, as well as download a copy of the slides that I'm about to go through, because there are clips in here and links and other articles. So if you want any of that information, it is available. Support the show at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And so let's get into the news of the day. Derek Chauvin trial getting really close to wrapped up. We don't have a verdict yet. Might be tomorrow, might be 2 weeks from now. Who knows? It's up to the jurors. But we did finish closing arguments today, and we've got a lot to break down. The closing arguments, generally speaking, were about what we'd expect. There was nothing really groundbreaking. This entire case has really followed that theme. Some people were waiting for that smoking gun, for somebody to pull a gun out of the briefcase. No, that didn't happen here. This was pretty much a scripted trial. We had a couple little surprises around the margins, but everything else went pretty much according to plan. And so closing arguments followed that same trajectory. Nothing really explosive. We do have some good and some bad things to say about both sides, but we are going to go through it. I have clips, a lot of different clips from the closing arguments, but then also after the closing arguments. So after the jurors heard everything they needed to hear from both sides, they were relieved for the day, and Judge Cahill came back out and started to address some issues that both parties had. So we're going to save that for the end of the conversation. And then we're going to talk about, now that the jurors have this, now that it's sort of sitting in their hands, what are they supposed to do now? We have Maxine Waters out over the weekend, basically threatening additional violence if a particular verdict is not reached. We have Minneapolis is now responding by closing their schools and doing remote learning again because they're concerned about the verdict. And we have some issues with how this is going to be settled by the jurors in the jury panel, in the deliberation room, now that they're sequestered. So we've got a lot to get to. So as always, let's start with the trial board. See who was playing today. We know that this was closing arguments, and so both sides were making their pitches over to the jurors. So we're going to be focused on the jurors here now moving forward. And as is always the case in criminal law, the prosecution goes first. We saw that that was headed off this morning by Steve Schleicher, who made his initial round of closing arguments to the jury. Eric Nelson, of course, made his closing arguments, and then the government, they get what's called a rebuttal close. So they get a second shot at closing, and that was done today by Mr. Jerry Blackwell. And so we have these three, where did that go? What happened there? We have these three people, Mr. Blackwell, Mr. Schleicher, and Mr. Nelson, all appearing in court today, all making closing arguments to the jurors. And this is our little representation of the jurors who are on the panel, and this is representative, as best you can get with emojis. This is what the jury panel looks like. So by demographic, age, gender, all of that stuff, that's what they look like. Here is a better breakdown. And so this is who now has the case. I think somebody was excused. I forgot who was excused. Actually, no, we do know who was excused. It was the 15th juror who is no longer with us. I believe. I could be mistaken about that. Anyways, this is the jury that we have seated, and now they're going to have to decipher all of the evidence. Quick refresher, these were some of the people that we saw that the government presented. Big witness here was Dr. Tobin, also this law professor near the end. We had Floyd's brother. We had a lot of different people coming in and talking about use of force. We had the chief of police over here. This was another use of force expert. This was the LAPD guy. We had another inspector basically saying that she thought it was asphyxia. We had a lot of people who came in and made the government's case compared to the defense. Not as many. We saw that Dr. Fowler was the last witness to testify, and not as much, right? Not that many people there. We have some sort of last minute ingestion theories and all this stuff. But I want to show you now sort of the summation of the closing arguments. And so closing arguments, you know, they're intended to be argumentative, right? You're supposed to go out there and deliver a compelling rationale and an explanation for the evidence, right? This is our theory. This is how it all fits together. This is why you have to convict this person or acquit this person. And so largely this morning, it was really just a summation of everything we had already seen thus far. We saw a lot of the timeline be fleshed out by Prosecutor Steve Schleicher. We also saw a lot of graphics, the same sort of charts and imagery that we saw. They played snips and bits from Floyd himself, right? We saw a lot of the imagery, a lot of the photographs. We heard a little bit about Floyd's personal story, and there was a lot of emotion in this. And so we're going to start with the prosecutor, Steve Schleicher, this morning. Very emotional, kind of pitch, kind of goes through, opens up, and talks about Floyd and where he came from and his family and his mother. And we heard from his brother, and we heard from the 9-year-old girl who said she didn't know what to do when she saw this happening. We were supposed to just call the police, because we wanted the police to respond because we knew that there was a crime happening right here. And he sort of, frames this out a little bit, and I thought he did a nice job, where he's saying this is not a war against the police. We're not fighting the police. We love police. We love the good police. There's nothing worse than there's nothing more that a good police officer hates than a bad police officer. Kind of that framing. And I thought it was effective, right? Because a lot of people are sort of making this a cop versus a particular demographic right now, a war between the two sides. And so what he came out, he said, no, it's not really like that at all. In fact, we love the police. And so if you're somebody who's pro-police on the jury panel, we're not trying to screw the police. We're just trying to screw Derek Chauvin. He's a bad police officer. He deserves this. So it's not really screwing, right? He deserves this. He's guilty of this offense. And so that's where this whole thing kind of goes. Now he goes through, it gets very mechanical again, right? We're refleshing out everything we've already seen. He's just condensing it and making sure that he's going through all of the different elements of the jury instructions, which are now available, and he's showing the jurors as they're reading through this. So he's almost like doing like assisted reading, right? We're going to read this paragraph together, and I'm going to explain this to you so that you know how to interpret this. And he's going through reading this. Okay, cause, right? We got to know that Derek Chauvin caused the death of Floyd, and here's how you analyze it. And then he's going out and he's giving all the best facts from the government. This is what this witness said. This is what this expert said, and on and on and on. And so this next clip is at the end of his testimony or his argument today, his remarks during closing. And you're going to see once again, it's a little bit, it's emotional. And he's just saying, listen, You know what you saw in that video. Okay. You know how you felt when you hit it, when you watched that. All of our stomachs turned, and that's it. And so as I've been saying in this entire trial, I've been talking about this for 20 something days now, but what the government is trying to do is narrow this puppy right down on that 9 minutes and 29 seconds. And the prosecutor in this case said that a lot. 9 minutes and 29 seconds, like 100 times, repeating it, right? Because it's a long time and it's a very damaging fact to the defense. So why wouldn't you just beat that into the ground like a dead horse? And he did a good job doing that. But what you're going to hear is he's saying, that's it. That's all that really matters. These 9 minutes and 29 seconds. How did that make you feel? How did that land on you emotionally? That's all you need to know. It's just a gut reaction. You know he committed this crime. And so it's sort of emotional and compelling. And you're going to see they end it. They do the same thing with their rebuttal close with a picture of George Floyd. So you're going to see George Floyd's face comes up. That's sort of the last thing that they leave you with. And when Jerry Blackwell comes out and does his rebuttal close, it's going to be the same thing, right? He ends with the same picture because it's a very emotional argument and they're using that to their advantage. So here is the prosecutor now saying, just trust your gut. You know what you saw.
It was grossly disproportionate. It is not an excuse for the shocking abuse that you saw with your own eyes, and you can believe your own eyes. This case is exactly what you thought when you saw it first, when you saw that video. It is exactly that. You can believe your eyes. It's exactly what you believed. It's exactly what you saw with your eyes. It's exactly what you knew. It's what you felt in your gut. It's what you now know in your heart. This wasn't policing. This was murder. The defendant is guilty of all 3 counts. All of them. And there's no excuse.
Here comes Floyd. There it is. All right, so he leaves that up as he walks away. So the jurors just have that imprinted right on their brains. Now, there's concepts called primacy and recency, right? Primacy and recency sort of mean the first thing you heard and the last thing you heard. Those are going to have a lot of effect on you. They're psychological studies. And so you always kind of want to do that mic drop, right? You want to walk out, boom, leave them wanting more, leave them, just sort of dazed and confused. What the heck was that? And so that's what they're doing here with Floyd, right? Leave them with that. Leave them with that memory as they're walking back into the deliberation room. And the other thing that you saw the prosecutor do here is make it emotional. Okay, we've heard a lot about pulmonary this and depressant this and fentanyl this and ratios and all, arterial sclerosis. All right, great. A lot of technical stuff that's kind of hard to decipher. So what Mr. Schleicher did before the jury, before his closing arguments closed and before he had to hand it off, is he wanted to just sting them, right? Connect them, drill into their body that emotional feeling. Make sure they remember that. Ask them to dig back down. Remember when you saw that? Remember when we saw it? Remember when you saw it? I did. I made a video about it here on YouTube. I think we might have talked about it that day. And the emotion there that you can feel. I mean, I was angry. I was upset. I was sort of, pissed about the whole thing, about what I saw. And to ask me to go back and get in touch with that is asking me to dig that sucker up. I might have buried it away back in May of last year and forgotten about it. But now, before I go into the deliberation room, prosecutor just asked me, pull that sucker off the shelf, bring that back. Carry it with you right into the jury room. And so that's effective, right? He's bringing up their emotions, asking them to connect with it, and it's very effective. Primacy and recency. It's the last thing that he left them with. And so pay attention to that as we go through these next clips. So as I mentioned, right, remember what he said. You don't even need to think about anything else. Just use your eyes. He said eyes, 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 eyes. Use your eyes, use your eyes. You know what you saw. Narrowing that down. We don't want to hear about the training, the reasonable force. We don't want to hear about fentanyl, methanol, 2019, heart disease, carbon monoxide, none of that. Just what you saw in the video. That's all you need to know. Use your eyes. So then Eric Nelson comes back out and says, wait a minute, guys. Yeah, 9 minutes and 29 seconds. You heard them repeating that like a broken record. This is not about that. This is about the 16 minutes before that and about everything else that you heard in this case, because those are all necessary in your analysis. So this is Eric Nelson now coming out and doing his close. So we're going to go, we did one from Schleicher. We're going to do 2 from Nelson. We're going to do 1 from Blackwell on the rebuttal. And so the government closes first, the defense closes second, and then the government gets to go again and sort of stack on top of it. And people go, what? That's not fair. Well, the justification, the rationale for that is that the government has the burden of proof. They've got to meet that very high burden, pushing it way beyond that standard. I'm going to show you the chart here in a minute, but it is a very tall order. So they get 2 cracks at it because the standard is supposed to be so high. Now, in my experience, practically the standard is quite low because most people think your client is guilty, not innocent, because the presumption has been topsy-turvied in this country so badly. But the point is that it's still a very high burden, and the government, as a result of that, is supposed to get 2 cracks at it. So here is Eric Nelson. Once again, the government is narrowing this puppy in. Eric Nelson is expanding this out. It's way bigger than those 9 minutes and 29 seconds.
And so we get into the 9 minutes and 29 seconds at this point. And the state has really focused on the 9 minutes and 29 seconds. 9 minutes, 29 seconds. 9 minutes, 29 seconds. It's not the proper analysis, because the 9 minutes and 29 seconds ignores the previous 16 minutes and 59 seconds. It completely disregards it. It says, in that moment, at that point, nothing else that happened before should be taken into consideration by a reasonable police officer. It tries to reframe the issue of what a reasonable police officer would do. A reasonable police officer would, in fact, take into consideration the previous 16 minutes and 59 seconds. Their experience with the subject, the struggle that they had, the comparison of the words to actions, it all comes into play. Why? Because human behavior is unpredictable. Human behavior is unpredictable, and nobody knows it better than a police officer. Someone can be compliant 1 second and fighting the next. Someone can be fighting and then compliant. Nobody knows it better
than a police officer. And so what he did in the rest of his closing argument is he went through and he actually played a lot more of the Floyd video than I thought he was going to. I sort of thought that maybe he might gloss over a lot of that just to, they've seen the video. It's kind of a bad video. Even if you are trying to make positive points by playing the video, it's still just an ugly video. It's an ugly scene. It's not something that is people in their best light, right? It's Floyd. It's officers. Everybody's getting into a brawl. It's just an ugly situation in general, no matter what side you're on this thing. So he actually was playing more of that, and he was showing sort of frame by frame that Floyd was actually fighting, right? He was resisting. And so he's sort of having this continuity of resistance that is following the cops along throughout the entire scene, right? He's sort of combative and then sort of a little bit more combative and then sort of a little bit more combative. And it's this slow progression that's taking place over the prior 16 minutes. The government wants you to just focus on the 9 after it's convenient for them, after they can sort of throw out all of Floyd's prior behaviors, like saying he couldn't breathe, right? He was complaining about breathing when he was in the back of the vehicle, in the back of the police vehicle, before he was ever on the ground and in a prone position. And so that's pretty relevant, don't you think? Eric Nelson seems to think so. And he's saying to the jurors, we got to expand this whole puppy out and analyze the entirety of the case. That's reasonableness. That's objectivity. It's saying that an officer would come here and make a decision based on the totality of the circumstances, not on the 9 minutes that you conveniently want them to focus on. It does require a broader analysis. And so he does a nice job going through that. A little bit, if I had a critique, I'd sort of question the playing of the video because it is a little bit ugly, but just, full deference to Eric Nelson and those things. I think that it may actually have worked in his favor, because there are little bits and pieces of that video where Floyd does seem to be a little bit aggressive, actually. And the way he did it today was somewhat effective. I thought he was actually, pausing, little clip here, little clip here, little clip here. And it's sort of this passive aggressiveness. And I thought he tied it all together, relatively nicely. And you'll notice his demeanor in court today was a little bit more animated, right? He was kind of moving around back to back on the podium, and, voice tonality was up and down. So clearly got some rest this weekend. Sounded like he was very well prepared for it and came out and delivered it. Now, this is the the final 3 minutes of his closing argument. I wanted to play this because he's sort of tying it all together again. And he's really making a good point on causation. And this is where I've said the entirety of this case is about causation. You know, we're talking a lot about police use of force and reasonableness and all of that stuff, the objectively reasonable officer and whether the prone position matters and all of that stuff. That's all relevant. It's all very pertinent. But I think it's sort of secondary in the analysis. The first question on all of the charges is, did Chauvin cause the death? Did he cause Floyd's death? It's about causation. Causation is where everything hangs. And so Nelson is sort of kind of tying it back into that right here. And he's saying, listen, you know, there are multiple variables in any case, right? It's multivariate. We can have a lot of different things interfacing with one another simultaneously. Government wants you to think that it was the knee, and just that, you know, A hit B, A went to B, knee killed Floyd, that's it. He's saying there's a lot of other things out there. We got fentanyl, heart disease, prior meth use, 2019 case, and the list goes on and on. So here he is now sort of wrapping it up. This is the final thing we're going to hear from him. At least the jury's going to hear from him. They're not going to hear from Nelson again unless there are jury questions or something else. I mean, this is the wrap up of the official case. So this is the last 3 minutes. So let's give it to Mr. Nelson and see what he has to say. We're going to do the same thing to Mr. Blackwell on the rebuttal, although his time's shorter because he has that little mic drop moment. All right, here is Mr. Nelson.
More importantly than this analysis is it shows that human beings make decisions in highly stressful situations that they believe to be right in the very moment it is occurring. There's lots of what ifs that could have happened. What could have happened, what should have happened. Lots of them in lots of regards. But we have to analyze this case from the perspective of a reasonable police officer at the precise moment with the totality of the circumstances when it comes to the use of force. We have to look at the cause of death to determine, did Mr. Floyd die exclusively of asphyxia, or were there other contributing factors that were not the natural result of Mr. Chauvin's acts? Right? Things that happened that were set in motion before Mr. Chauvin ever arrived. The drug ingestion, right? The bad heart, the diseased heart, the hypertension. All of these things existed before Mr. Chauvin arrived. The struggle. What role did the struggle play? We know, based on a prior incident, that Mr. Floyd's heart was beating at 219 over 160 in a situation where he was confronted by police and had ingested drugs. He didn't die that day. All of this, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, all of this, when you take into consideration the presumption of innocence and proof beyond a reasonable doubt, I would submit to you that it is nonsense to suggest that none of these other factors had any role. That is not reasonable. And when you, as members of the jury, conclude your analysis of the evidence, when you review the entirety of the evidence, when you review the law as written, and you conclude it all within a thorough, honest analysis, the state has failed to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. And therefore, Mr. Chauvin should be found not guilty of all counts.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, so good close there, and exactly, I think, hit the mark that it needed to hit. This was about causation, and he said that. He said, listen, we have to ask ourselves here, did the knee, is that it? Is that what killed Floyd, or are there other things that contributed to it? It's an interesting frame, and he says, listen, was what killed Floyd the natural result of Chauvin's knee, Or was it were these things that existed before Chauvin was even there that day? And then he goes back to the beyond a reasonable doubt standard. So we're going to revisit this. So put a pin in this right now. We're going to wrap up with Mr. Blackwell, and then we're going to do some analysis. But from Nelson's, I want to remember two things. Number one, the natural result, or sort of something that happened simultaneously with the knee or after the knee, or was this something that happened before the knee? We're talking about causation, right? Something bumps into something else that causes something else to bump into something else, right? It's sort of like physics, or if you go back to high school physics or whatever. We're talking about what happens first, what interacts with something else that causes something else to happen. It's all about causation. So we're gonna revisit that with Mr. Nelson. But before we do, here is a clip that is getting a lot of play now on Twitter. It is that mic drop moment. This is Mr. Jerry Blackwell, who is going through and doing the rebuttal close. So we have Steve Schleicher comes out first, Eric Nelson, government gets to go the second time. And so here's Mr. Blackwell coming out and saying, it's not about George Floyd's heart, his big heart. It's about Derek Chauvin's little heart. Ooh, it's good. Here is Mr. Blackwell.
Here's what I thought then was the largest departure from here, the evidence. I'll show it to you. You were told, for example, that Mr. Floyd died because his heart was too big. You heard that testimony. And now, having seen all the evidence, having heard all the evidence, you know the truth. And the truth of the matter is that the reason George Floyd is dead is because Mr. Chauvin's heart was too small.
Just let that one hang.
Grab your instructions again.
Judge says, jurors, grab your instructions, get out of here. You just heard that mic drop with a thud, and so that was Mr. Blackwell. Now, we now know kind of what the arguments are, right? Where the prosecution wants to really get really tight on what they saw, heard, what you felt that particular day. Nelson wants to expand this thing out. And so I've been trying to think about how to communicate some of these concepts in a way that I can translate on YouTube and video. And so a concept that we talk a lot about is dominoes, right? And especially with causation. You got one domino who goes into the next domino, which goes into the next domino. And so as I was thinking about the Floyd case, I want to share with you something that I put together, and we'll see how this works out today. But here is a set of dominoes that we've got. We've got them sort of labeled. And this is really my interpretation of what the government is trying to communicate in their case. We're talking about causation here. So on the far right, where the domino is ultimately going to end up, we've got death, right? This is George Floyd's death. We know that the whole scene started with a $20 bill, right? $20 bill led to the cops get called. Cops got called. They came back out. Floyd was under arrest, right? He was sort of resisting arrest as they were trying to get him back into the vehicle. They put him in handcuffs, tried to, throw him in the vehicle. There was law enforcement subdual, of course, and there was a position that Floyd was put in on the ground. All of that was okay, may not have caused death until we got to Chauvin's knee. This is sort of the key domino here. That's why it's in red there. And so Chauvin's knee, if we would have removed Chauvin's knee, arguably you can make the case that, right, the positioning on the ground, law enforcement subdual, all of that stuff, the dominoes, they wouldn't have continued to fall, but for Chauvin's knee. If Chauvin's knee is there, then the sequence continues. We've got the resisting arrest. He's breathing heavily. Floyd's in handcuffs. Floyd's been subdued by law enforcement officials. And then in conjunction with Chauvin's knee, now what do we have? We have low oxygen because of the knee that leads to can't breathe. Then we have asphyxiation, which leads to death, right? And this is something that we've seen sort of fleshed out in this scenario. Now you can go through there and make quibbles about that domino doesn't go there. But the point here is if Chauvin's knee is not in existence, if Chauvin does not put the knee there, then we do not have this sequence of events. We don't go from the $20 bill over to death. We just have somebody who gets arrested. Chauvin's knee is necessary in order to get to death. Now, if you're the defense, you're going to take the same concept and come back out and you're going to say, yeah, kind of, maybe, but there's a lot of other things that were going to be causing this death anyways. And so it might look something like this, right? Same chart, same concept, but now let's say we get rid of Chauvin's knee. Let's do our same analysis. So on the right side, we've got death over here. We still have the same $20 bill, but the defense now is saying, well, the $20 bill prompted the police to come. So that was resisting arrest. George Floyd was hyperventilating there, right? He was put in handcuffs. We know all of that. We've got Floyd's arterial sclerosis, which was already happening before Chauvin got there. We already know that there was prior meth use, which was before Chauvin got there. We have fentanyl use, which was before Chauvin got there. And so you could take this entire thing out, and this domino is still going to hit this next domino, right? We're going to keep moving forward. We also have, which is not Chauvin's fault, we also have law enforcement subdual, right? We saw that from the death certificate. So other officers were there. We had Kung and Lane and Thao. They were also involved in that. We have hypertension in the heart, right? And so that's going to necessarily trigger into death at some point. We have cardiopulmonary arrest. The heart just basically gave out. And so you can say that even without Chauvin's knee, all of these things are just going to happen anyways. The fentanyl use, the prior meth, the arteriosclerosis, the subdual from law enforcement, hypertension, all of it, it's all moving that direction, whether or not we have Chauvin's knee. Now, Chauvin could have put the knee on the neck. Maybe that was a contribution. Maybe that was a contributing factor. But all of these things are heavier dominoes. They're bigger dominoes, and they are all contributing to the death. So now we have, something that looks like this for the defense, something that looks like this for the prosecution, where Chauvin's knee is necessary in the government's case to cause death. It's required for death. Here, in the defense case, it's not. It's not really required. Floyd is probably going to die with or without the knee. Chauvin, might have been there while Floyd was dying because he was being subdued, but it could have been any other officer, right? Floyd might have just died in general. And so a different way to frame this out is to talk about it in terms of a pie chart, right? What does this look like? If we go through and in our little mental gymnastics gymnasium, we start fleshing out the entire universe of potential causes of death for George Floyd. If we say, listen, yeah, it could have been Chauvin's knee. We saw the video. Looks like Chauvin's knee, right? We saw it on there for a long period of time. Floyd's head is crunched down there between his neck and his knee and the pavement. Awful situation. Kind of obvious, right? And human beings, we kind of know what we see when we see it, and we saw what we saw. That's one option. You could have another option, right? It could have just been a heart attack or heart disease that caused cardiopulmonary arrest. Could have been arteriosclerosis. Could have been hypertensive heart disease. Could have been fentanyl. Could have been his heart just gave out because of his prior methamphetamine use. Could have been his heart gave out as a result of his 2019 prior. Could have been a lot of different things. Could have been other officers didn't intercede on behalf of Chauvin. There were 3 other cops there. Why didn't they step in? Are they contributors to this entire scene? Arguably. What about the passerbys? What about the witnesses on the side? They didn't, or they were being aggressive. Maybe that caused the officers to hesitate to provide aid and to render assistance. And their interpretation of the threat on that day was mirrored in court by Officer Chang, who testified that he feared for the officer's safety. And we also saw the paramedics, when they showed up at the scene, they were concerned about the safety. So could you ascribe some of this to the crowd very remotely? Yeah, a little bit. Maybe 1%, 2%, 5%. I don't know. Right? But I'm sure that the officers might say that the reason, and we heard them say that, the reason they didn't start rendering aid was because they were threatened. We heard the paramedics say that from the government's own case, right? They presented them, I think. So you've got evidence that there are multiple causes. And the question is, if we lay all of those out on the table, which ones can we pick up and say that is the one that caused Floyd to die in front of us on that particular day? And so again, this has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. This is something that Eric Nelson just mentioned. And I want to show you this chart that we have sitting around our office. And this is an old one, so excuse the scuffs. But this is something that defense attorneys often use in court. And so Eric Nelson today, in his arguments, was talking about the beyond a reasonable doubt standard. And I want to just show you this briefly so you can see sort of a graph that we use here. Reasonable doubt. It's the highest standard. So when Eric Nelson was talking about this today, he was talking about preponderance of the evidence and clear and convincing evidence. These were the 2 standards that he mentioned. Reasonable doubt. It's the highest standard. A firm belief that the allegations are true is for clear and convincing. If somebody is found to be guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, means beyond the greater weight or the amount of the evidence, a firm belief that the allegations are true is this standard. It's got to be even above that. Very, very high standard. So Eric Nelson was only talking about clear and convincing and preponderant standards. But these are all of the other standards that we often see in criminal law. We see reasonable suspicion, to conduct a traffic stop, for example, probable cause to make an arrest. These are different standards that you'll see throughout the practice of criminal law. But beyond a reasonable doubt is the highest one. And this is a chart that, we'll often bring around in court, just show to the judge, show to the jurors in court as an exhibit. And this is an old one. You can see it's kind of banged up, but we have this stuff lying around the office. And that is something that Eric Nelson was trying to communicate to people, that if you are going to be saying or analyzing these factors, multiple different factors, arteriosclerosis, hypertension, heart disease, all of these other things, that's the standard that you're applying. Can you say beyond a reasonable doubt that did not contribute or cause the death? Beyond a reasonable doubt that fentanyl had nothing to do with it, arterial sclerosis had nothing to do with it? It's a pretty high standard. That's kind of where he's going with this. And let's flesh this out in terms of pie charts. Okay, so here is an example. If you were somebody who says that George Floyd's death was caused by the knee, 100%, nothing else factored in, then this is what your chart would look like. And in fact, this is what Dr. Tobin's chart looks like, right? He said it's almost exclusively this. I think he said it is exclusively this. And Dr. Tobin is not alone here. He has a lot of other people who are on his team. We heard, I think, from 3 other expert witnesses on the government side who agree with him, who all said pulmonary, low oxygen, and asphyxia was the cause of death. So that's that. If you're in that camp, that's what you think. If you are somebody who says, well, maybe it was mostly the knee, but there were some other things going on there. We know that there was fentanyl toxicology. We know that Dr. Baker said that he had heart problems. Maybe there are other things, but I still think that Chauvin was the primary cause, right? The knee on the neck was the primary cause. Then it would look something like this. The knee would take up the lion's share of the pie chart. The heart might take 10%. Drugs might take 10%. And so in a situation like that, right, you'd say, well, Chauvin's guilty because the knee is something that is the substantial causal factor in this case. And on the domino chart, you'd sort of say that you were more on the government side of this thing. The knee triggered the other dominoes to fall. The knee triggered the fentanyl reaction. The knee triggered the methamphetamine, heart problems. All of it was started by the knee. The defense is saying, no. All those things just were already in his body, right? He was already intoxicated, already had heart problems, already almost died in 2019. The knee was just something that was happening while all of these other things were interfacing with each other. So this is the government's case, or this is people who are sort of in this camp. They're going to be leaning towards guilt. Now, you can sort of divide this thing up, interestingly, into different segments. Okay, so now if you're somebody who thinks, well, the drugs probably played a pretty significant causal factor, the heart also played a pretty significant causal factor, but the knee played a bigger factor than either one of those two individually, right? See how this kind of gets messy? So now you've got drugs plus the heart at 60%, and now you have the knee at 40%. So is Derek Chauvin guilty under this circumstance? Okay, it depends, right? You're the jurors, so you get to sort of delineate what is a substantial causal factor here. And is this causation? Because here you have drugs and heart really are the bigger cause at 60%, but the knee might be 40%, right? And so, the reason why I'm going through these, this is just a way to sort of interpret and process this information for yourself. Probably some of the same stuff that the jurors are going through right now. They're trying to weigh all these different factors. Now, I don't know if they're using pie charts or dominoes, but it's these concepts. They've got all these different factors and they're trying to piece them together. And so, in a situation like this, yeah, maybe you've got some jurors to work on. You got some people who say the drugs mattered, the heart mattered, the knee mattered. And so this might be changing, right? This chart might be sort of adjusting dynamically in one direction. Remember when we sort of saw the graphs during the election night where, you have the needles moving all over the place? That's kind of happening right now in real time. And so you can rely on Dr. Tobin, say it's just the knee. It was low oxygen and asphyxia, or there were other contributing factors. Now, we also heard from Dr. Baker, And so what happens if you take this same analysis, right? What if we take the information that we're hearing from the expert witnesses, we're digesting it, and we're trying to just go off of the primary exhibit? So now let's take a look at the certificate of death. So remember this? This was one of the exhibits, Exhibit 193. And it says here, the cause of death was cardiopulmonary arrest, complicating law enforcement subdual, restraint, and neck compression. So let's break this down into separate parts. We've got neck compression. That's one. We have restraint. That's another one. We have subdual, which is another one. See, there's a comma here. We have cardiopulmonary arrest. Then we also have arteriosclerotic and hypertensive heart disease. We're going to count those as two separate diseases. We got fentanyl intoxication, and we have recent methamphetamine use. Okay, and so we heard from Dr. Baker that these are contributing factors, right? These actually did contribute to the death. He's not going to put them on there if they're not on that, if they don't contribute to the death. So we know that it's a greater than zero that those contributed to the death, if you want to break it up in a pie chart analysis. And so what happens if you just went off of their own medical certificate and you just broke it up? It might look something like this. Okay, now here's a pie chart. Where are we looking? If you'll notice, I took each one of these clips directly from the death certificate. So you see this here? I just clipped this out. Law enforcement subdual right there. So we clipped this out. Now, I'm just, sort of ballparking these numbers. And this is all to scale. So let's say law enforcement subdual was just 10%. Right? That's Thao, Kung, and Lane. They're all there. It's not just Chauvin. Do they get 10% of that? I don't know. You can be the judge. What about the restraint, right? They were all pulling on him. They were all laying on him, on his back. Multiple of them were. So we can give him that. We have neck compression. So we're going to give that one to Chauvin, let's say. Give that one 20% if you want, or we can just say we'll give that leftovers, right? So we can go around the other way. We can say, how about meth use? We'll give that 10%. We had 19 nanograms per milliliter. If you think that's a causal factor, well, give it a small one, 10%. Fentanyl, maybe 20%, let's say, right? And that is, we know that this came from the toxicology report, 11 nanograms per milliliter over here, fentanyl, 19 nanograms per milliliter. We know that Dr. Baker gave the heart disease a significant weight. So what if we just gave that 15% because his coronary arteries were 90% clogged, and then we have hypertensive heart disease because they weighed his heart and it was big, right? So what if you gave that, let's say 15%, because we're going to make that a little bit higher according to the government's own witness. We're going to give 15% to the hypertensive heart disease. And what does that leave us with? Leaves us with 20% for neck compression. Okay? And if you go through all of this, there's some pretty good evidence that the government presented and the defense presented. Some of this came from the government's own witnesses, especially about the heart disease. So now if you break this down and you can say, all right, well, we can go off of the death certificate itself. What is Chauvin's responsibility here? Is it this 20%? Is the 20% a significant, substantial causal factor in the death? And so what you can see we're doing is the same thing that Nelson's doing right now. We are expanding this out. And you could even go one step further, right? You could have another pie chart and you could add in all of the other factors. Right? On this chart, there's nothing about the 2019 prior. Okay, he was in the hospital for that. When your blood pressure is that high, that's causing significant damage. That's largely why the judge let it in, to talk about it, because of the long-lasting impact of having a blood pressure that is through the roof. It can have long-term consequences, right? That's not in there. What about the the paramedics' failure to render aid? That's not in there. What about the crowd? Maybe they contributed 5%. If you want to be very reasonable, if you want to give the benefit of the doubt to Chauvin, remember, in this country, you still have the presumption of innocence. So you got to look at it in a light most favorable to that side. Well, if we said the crowd maybe contributed to it, maybe Genevieve Hansen contributed to it. Now you can have a pie chart that has a lot more slices in there. The more slices you throw in there, the smaller the share Chauvin gets, which is exactly what Nelson's trying to do. Sort of defray some of the causation and lump it all right back in here. And it's not the domino where Chauvin's knee caused all of this other stuff to happen. All this stuff was happening regardless of the knee. the meth use, 2019 prior, neck compression, restraint, heart disease, arterial sclerosis, blah, 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 blah. That was all happening before Derek Chauvin even showed up that day. So those dominoes are already falling. Chauvin just put his knee in the middle of it while they were falling. Versus the government saying it all started with Chauvin. He is the but-for cause. So what do you think? What camp do you fall in? We're going to take some questions, but before we do, we got a little bit more work to do. So we've got to wrap up on what happened after this. So now all of this has been handed off to the jury. The jury is now out of the room. So Judge Cahill then says, well, I think I heard some objections out there. And Eric Nelson says, hey, I'm going to move for a mistrial. Which is pretty standard, right? I was expecting that to happen, and I was expecting a claim of prosecutorial misconduct to happen. Here it is.
All right, a couple of things. I know the defense was in. All right, a couple of things. I know the defense was in the process, I think, of making expressing a concern or an objection to counsel's argument belittling the defense. Is that what I correctly perceived that objection? I think we dealt with it sufficiently during the objections during the rebuttal. So there will be no additional instruction in that regard.
I do believe that it constitutes prosecutorial misconduct and is potentially basis for grounds for a mistrial.
Okay, I think the use of the word nonsense is what you're talking about originally.
Originally, Your Honor, but then in rebuttal there were repeated comments about how we were, and implications that we were shading was one example, that we were creating Halloween stories was another example, that these were stories, and that was a repeated comment. Stated that we misrepresented facts and put words into Dr. Baker's mouth, that we made several statements that they put forth as stories. After the court instructed him to stop using the word stories, he clarified that it's just fabricated facts. And so there were multiple references to that, that we were shading the truth, right? I mean, and again, so multiple objections. This is essentially governed by State versus McDaniel. The final argument to the jury of prosecutor is governed by a unique set of rules which differ significantly from those governing counsel in civil suits, and even those governing defense counsel in the very same criminal trial.
Yep.
These special rules follow directly from the prosecutor's inherently unique role in the criminal justice system, which mandates that the prosecutor.
All right, so he goes on and he keeps reading some of the rules, but yeah, there's a problem here, right? He's saying that during the rebuttal that Mr. Blackwell got a little bit loose with the language and was sort of saying things like, they're telling you Halloween stories and they're misrepresenting the facts and they're shading the truth and all of those things. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Mr. Blackwell is actually a private attorney who is sort of volunteering for the government in this case. And what you just heard Mr. Nelson say is that the rules are a little bit more strict for the government as to some of these things because they are prosecutors, right? They swear an oath. They've got a duty to enforce justice, not necessarily to go and seek convictions. And so their responsibilities are a little bit different than the defense, right? The defense has to represent our clients, private citizens. And so, some of the defense does not have the entire weight of the government behind them, right? We do not control the levers of power, which are massive in any one of these agencies. Tens, hundreds of millions of dollars or billion-dollar agencies are these prosecuting agencies, especially in here in Arizona, right? It's one of our biggest agencies in this state is the county attorney's office. So it's a big deal, right? And so prosecution, because they have that very, very, very heavy sword that they can just swing around, they have a little bit more responsibility in the form of not committing prosecutorial misconduct. So Mr. Blackwell may be used to some of this stuff flying in the defense world where you can kind of come out here, oh, the government's trying to, do a bunch of nonsense. We can say those things, but the defense or the prosecution kind of has a little bit stricter rules. So Mr. Nelson comes back out and says, yeah, they're calling us Halloween stories, fabricated facts, shading the truth, misrepresenting facts, just essentially belittling the defense, moves for a mistrial. Judge Cahill says, no, not so fast. We issued a curative instruction during the closing, basically telling the jurors, nudging them to behave and be a little bit more diplomatic, but also telling the jurors to disregard some of those statements. So the last thing that Cahill is going to do today is declare a mistrial over some impolite language in closing remarks. But there is more. May not be a mistrial here, but maybe we're talking about an appeal. Why? Maxine Waters, of course. When there are problems in this country, largely you can connect it back to Maxine Waters. It's like that. What's that, like 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? Where you're like, everybody knows Kevin Bacon through like 7 people or 3 people or whatever it is. Kind of the same thing with Maxine Waters. Anything goes bad, it's her fault, right? It's raining out. Well, it rains in California. Guess what else is in California? Maxine Waters. See how that works? We have Democrat Maxine Waters on if Derek Chauvin is acquitted. This comes over from the Daily Wire. Says, get more confrontational, she said. Get on the street. She said on Saturday night. First off, let's back this up. Who is Representative Maxine Waters? It's this woman over here. We're going to play a video of her shortly, but she is a representative from California. She said on Saturday night that if Chauvin is not found guilty of murder for the death of Floyd, that activists must, quote, get more confrontational on the street because the activists need to make sure that they know we mean business. So she said that on Saturday night, like 2 days ago. Okay, closing arguments were Monday. She is saying that on Saturday night. Guess where else she's saying it? Is she saying it from California? No. Guess. Minnesota. She flew from her jurisdiction as a representative in California to a different district where she is not a representative, unless I'm mistaken, to go out there and rally a bunch of people to take to the streets and get more confrontational so that people know they mean business if she does not get the verdict that she wants. Now, Judge Cahill is not happy about this, nor should he be. This is insanity. But let's take a quick look and see what else is going on. Waters made the remark alongside protesters in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, where police shot and killed Daunte Wright, who had a warrant out for his arrest. We're looking for a guilty verdict, she said. This is a quote. We're looking for a guilty verdict, and we're going to see if all of this that took place and has been taking place after they saw what happened to George Floyd, if nothing does not happen, which is a double negative, then we know that we've got to not only stay in the street, but we've got to fight for justice. But I'm very hopefully, and I hope that we're going to get a verdict that they will say guilty, guilty, guilty. And if we don't, we cannot go away. All right, so that is an elected congressperson. Okay, when asked what protesters should do if they do not get the verdict they want, Waters responded, well, we got to stay on the street. Okay, so here is Representative Maxine Waters now. This is a video of her. Comes over from this group over here. That's nice. Maxine Waters calls for rioters to stay in the street and fight for justice. Again, against police unless Chauvin is declared guilty for murder, not just manslaughter, which is funny because he's not being charged with like a premeditated murder. He's got a couple of the other ones, but she said, we got to get more confrontational. We got to make sure they know we mean business.
Get what you just told. What should the people do? What should protesters on the street do?
I didn't hear you.
What happens?
What should protesters do?
Well, we got to stay on the street, and we've got to get more active. We've got to get more confrontational. We've got to make sure that they know that we mean business.
What do you think about this curfew?
Whoa. Stay in the street. Did she say the word fight? Did she say fight? Let's listen to that one more time. I think she said the word fight because if you recall, Donald Trump said fight like hell and he got impeached for that. Let's listen in.
Get what you just told. What should the people do? What should protesters on the street do?
I didn't hear you.
What happens?
What should protesters do?
Well, we got to stay on the street, and we've got to get more active. We've got to get more confrontational.
Whoa.
We've got to make sure that they know that we mean business.
What do you think about this curfew?
All right, so I didn't hear fight for justice in that one. Let's see if she's got it this one.
I don't think anything about curfew. I don't think anything about curfew. I don't know what curfew means. Curfew means that I want you all to stop talking. I want you to stop meeting. I want you to stop gathering. I don't agree with that.
Are you going to stay out here?
Oh, no, I'm not going to stay out here. I came here from Washington just to be here to make sure that I let my voice be heard among all of those who have been putting so much time on the street. And so I'm hopeful that the protests will continue.
All right, so she's actually encouraging law breaking, and she's encouraging people to take to the streets so that people know that they mean business. This is a sitting congressperson who is elected to the federal U.S. Congress, which is a very powerful organization in this country, and she is weighing in on a co-equal branch of government and we can say a smaller branch of government. This is a state government, right? This is a state court, low-level court for a felony, not a federal district court, nothing like that, right? This is a state local court. We have the supremacy clause, says that the federal government is supreme to a lot of the state rules. And so this is an elected federal congressperson coming down, trying to interfere directly with a trial that's happening of national interest. On the ground, flies out from her district into Minnesota to make her voice heard, and says that if they don't get the verdict that they want, that's a problem. It sounds like insurrection to me. It sounds like it clearly. Now, Eric Nelson also heard this clip, as did the judge, as did Derek Chauvin, as did the prosecutors. Is this a problem when your trial is not even over yet? Okay, the jurors are set to deliberate, and you have Maxine Waters out there saying, hit the streets, and we're going to get more confrontational unless we get a verdict, and it has to be guilty, guilty, guilty. Okay, now you might think Maxine Waters is a joke. I happen to, but it's still a sitting congressperson who is carrying a lot of power and a lot of heft and a lot of voices, a lot of people out there with her. And they see her as a legitimate person, as a legitimate vessel to carry their grievances. And so if she says that the only just outcome here is guilty, what is that? What else can you glean from that? That anything else is illegitimate. What happens if you have an illegitimate verdict because you have just undermined a co-equal branch of government called the judiciary? You have a lot of angry people who just took their statement from you that says, well, this thing is illegitimate unless we get a specific outcome, right? So all of the people who are hyperventilating about Donald Trump getting a little bit mouthy with his statements, hopefully they're getting a little bit mouthy with her statements. Now, I agree that she's got the right to protest and all of that stuff. Very irresponsible. Actually joining in on the protest on the ground, and nobody cares. All right, so let's see what Eric Nelson has to say about this. He is not happy, neither is Judge Cahill.
So, but my phone gives me alerts on things that just happened. I mean, you can't avoid it. And it is so pervasive that it is, I just don't know how this jury...
One more time.
But my phone gives me alerts on things that just happened. I mean, you can't avoid it. And it is so pervasive that it is, I just don't know how this jury, it can really be said to be that they are free from the taint of this. And now that we have U.S. representatives threatening acts of violence in relation to this specific case, it's mind-boggling to me, Judge.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you that Congresswoman Waters may have given you something on appeal that may result in this whole trial being overturned. But what's the state's position?
What? This whole trial being overturned? Judge Cahill just said that. Maxine Waters may have given you something that is going to result in this entire trial coming back down. We say coming back down, it goes up on appeal. Nobody wants it coming back down, right? Trial court judges, it's sort of something that we all say. Nobody wants this coming back down, so we want to make sure we do it right now. Because if we screw something up, it's going to be appealed, and it's going to come back down. We're going to have to do the whole friggin' thing over again. Maxine Waters just said some stupid stuff on Saturday, specifically targeting this case, right? This is a separate co-equal branch of government, specifically targeting Derek Chauvin, a private person now on trial, interfering with his specific case, not talking about police reform generally, not talking about, the justice system. Derek Chauvin, we want guilty. Otherwise, there's going to be more protests and problems in the street. Don't get out. Don't leave and get more confrontational. Judge goes, yeah, that's a problem. We might be appealing this whole thing. Might see you back here again in a year. Here he goes again. Here's the judge giving her another scold. We'll see what comes of it. Once again, Eric Nelson is moving for a mistrial. Here's Judge Cahill saying, nah, it's not going to happen.
Whatever media reports. I'm aware of the media reports. I'm aware that Congresswoman Waters was talking specifically about this trial and about the unacceptability of anything less than a murder conviction, and talk about being confrontational. But you can submit the press articles about that. This goes back to what I've been saying from the beginning. I wish elected officials would stop talking about this case, especially in a manner that is disrespectful to the rule of law and to the judicial branch and our function. I think if they want to give their opinions, they should do so in a respectful and in a manner that is consistent with their oath to the Constitution, to respect a co-equal branch of government. Their failure to do so, I think, is abhorrent, but I don't think it has prejudiced us with additional material that would prejudice this jury. They have been told not to watch the news. I trust they are following those instructions, and that there is not in any way a prejudice to the defendant beyond the articles that we're talking specifically about the facts of this case. A congresswoman's opinion really doesn't matter a whole lot.
Cheers. Cheers on that, Judge. You're right. Any congressperson's opinion, really, in my book, carries very little weight, generally speaking, but that's just my personal disposition. What about the jurors? What about people who are living there when you have congresspeople flying in from elsewhere around the country to come in and stoke division and anger and outrage in your town? You live there. You got to go home. You're sequestered now. Now, I think the judge is right that this thing is a gigantic problem, and that maybe this does open the door for an appeal down the road or post-conviction relief or something to that effect. I don't know. But it is a problem. And I think the judge is a little bit naive on this whole thing. So I told them not to watch the news. So I guess that they're not watching the news and they can't be prejudiced. I would bet if you called those jurors back in and voir dired them, that they would say, I heard about that. Yeah, I heard about it. And I'm seeing what's going on right now. I know you told me not to watch the news, but I literally am there, right? I'm in Minneapolis. How am I supposed to avoid it? Everywhere you go, you get the notifications on your phone, see stuff on the TVs when you're walking down the street, for crying out loud, right? Everywhere you go, it's on TVs at restaurants, and you're going to see it, especially the Maxine Waters stuff. It's everywhere. Everybody's talking about it. So it's a big problem. Now, what's so funny about this entire thing is if Maxine Waters really wants to see Chauvin convicted, she should have not said anything. Because now what happens? What happens if Chauvin is convicted? He appeals it, says, I did not get a fair trial because Looney Tunes like Maxine Waters and others, like the people on the city council and elsewhere, were doing a bunch of stuff to interfere with the trial in the middle of the trial. The city settlement came out during voir dire, right in the middle of jury selection. Maxine Waters now comes out and is dropping these types of threats right in the middle of closing arguments. The official government now is expressing its opinion from other branches on one specific case, one specific defendant, one specific individual in the judiciary. I don't think the appeals court are going to like that at all. Now, if that comes back down, then Maxine Waters may have just given Derek Chauvin a second bite at the apple. Can you believe that? A woman out there screaming for convictions may ultimately help Derek Chauvin get acquitted. Or if he's convicted here, get another bite at the apple because of her insane comments. So you're just, okay, if you think you're being helpful, if you think you're adding to your cause, go hog wild. But I'll tell you this, as a defense attorney, if I'm Eric Nelson, I'm going, love it. Go ahead, Maxine. Keep going. Go hog wild. Bring in everybody else. Bring in AOC. Bring in, Rashida, whatever, whoever you want. Run your mouth off, because this is something anytime in a criminal defense case where you can sort of see a deviation from the norm, where you can see stuff go a little bit unusual for the government. That is typically a good thing. The government likes to sort of run their prosecutions by the book. It's like paint by numbers, right? Put one here and two there and whatever. And this gives them the opportunity, the defense, the opportunity to introduce new arguments. How many other criminal defense cases do you have? I'm speaking to other criminal defense lawyers out there. Really talking to myself here currently. But if you are out there, it is kind of a gift How many times do you have a criminal defendant where you suddenly get the argument that a sitting congressperson is trying to interfere in your case? Never. How many times do you get a settlement for $27 million in the middle of jury selection for your client? Never. Never happens. And so this is something that is a new variable that opens the door for a whole bunch of new arguments. What's so interesting here is that the people who are causing these rifts think that they're doing so to the detriment of Derek Chauvin, but legally it may come back and actually help him in the end. Now, the case is with the jurors. What is happening in Minneapolis? Well, National Guard apparently says that there was a drive-by shooting or something. 2 soldiers with the National Guard suffered injuries when someone shot at them early Sunday morning in North Minneapolis. And this was after, I think, Maxine Waters was, sort of out there running her mouth. A Minnesota National Guard and Minneapolis police team were fired upon by a light-colored SUV early Sunday morning. 2 National Guard members did sustain minor injuries from the incident. 1 National Guard member was taken to the hospital to receive care for lacerations from shattered glass. Soldiers and police were providing neighborhood security in the area of West Broadway and Penn Avenues. Gunshots rang out 4:19. I am relieved to know that none of our guardsmen were injured. Dispatch audio reveals shots came from a white SUV. Members of the Guard are in the Twin Cities as part of Minnesota's Operation Safety Net's response to civil unrest related to the shooting of Dante Wright and the Derek Chauvin murder trial. Now, Minneapolis schools are not faring any better, really. They are going back down to remote learning because of the Chauvin trial and the civil unrest. So the kids now are also being sheltered in place because the people who are running the schools and the local governments are concerned for their safety. But the jurors apparently, well, they're fine. They're all good. They're not watching the news. We have Minneapolis public schools will return to remote learning for the verdict out of their desire to keep students safe. Anticipating unrest after the jury delivers a verdict in the former officer Chauvin's trial, Minneapolis public schools said that they're going to return to remote learning at the end of next week. This is what we got here on April 16th. It says, "Dear MPS students and families, our community is moving through an extraordinarily challenging time as we react to the killings of Dante Wright, who is a former MPS student, by a Brooklyn Center police officer. Just as testimony in the trial, former officer Derek Chauvin concludes. We anticipate that a verdict in the Chauvin case could impact in-person learning in Minneapolis public schools. In order to give families as much time as possible to plan for changes in their daily routine, we want to share the following information. In-person learning next week will be impacted by the trial specifically." So we have a trial in this country now displacing students. The Derek Chauvin jury will begin deliberation Monday, the same time that MPS middle grades are making in-person learning available for the first time in more than a year. After speaking with Hennepin County sources, we believe that we can best serve students and staff through changing the learning format next week. So Monday, Tuesday, it's going to be in person. Wednesday through Friday, all in-person students are going to return home for distance learning. And they're bracing for impact there. Students may be impacted by the ongoing public protests, and race may be a topic of conversation in your child's classroom. The racism and violence that has been highlighted in these tragic incidents may be widely discussed among some students in our schools. As appropriate and as they are comfortable, teachers will give students the opportunity to process their feelings, how this feels to them personally, and how they are impacted by having the eyes of the world on Minneapolis. Yeah, it's a big deal. And I was sympathetic to this last week. Remember I said this? I mean, these people are trying to save their city. You have Maxine Waters, you have CNN, you have all these people parachuting in to Minneapolis to just cause division and report and just wreck the local environments. You're seeing mobs and groups of people chase the reporters out. They're running CNN out of there because they know what they're doing. They know they're going to come in here, manipulate all of the conversations, agitate a bunch of people, and then they're going to pull this escape hatch, go home in their little bougie, apartments, and they're going to watch Minneapolis burn from afar, knowing that they contributed to it from their ensconced, robed, whatever. All right, so understanding that every educator will approach this differently. All right, so that's it from the school. Let's go over to some questions. Long segment on the Chauvin stuff, but boy, it has been a trial. And so we just got through something like 20-something days. Closings, we're there. Jury's deliberating. Let's hear from you. Let's go over to the questions. Once again, these questions come from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. If you want to ask, You can support the show, download a copy of the slides, ask a question, and join the program over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. All right, we got News Now Wyoming says, if they find him guilty of all 3 charges, would they typically set his sentences to concurrent or consecutive, since they are all 3 for the exact same thing? So look, typically concurrent. Typically concurrent for something like this. So what he's talking about is concurrent sentences or consecutive sentences. So do they run one after the other? So let's say he's convicted. Let's say the judge sentences him 10 years apiece on all 3 charges. I know that's not how the sentencing works, but let's just say 10 years apiece. If he's convicted 3 years times 10, what does that mean? Does he do 10 years, finishes 1, does another 10 years, finishes 2, does another 10 years, and finishes the 3rd one? That's consecutive sentencing versus concurrent, which would mean he serves all 3 10-year sentences at the same time. And because this all happened on the same date of offense, should be concurrent. If it was, multiple offenses, the judge might want to run them consecutively, but it typically depends on a lot. It depends on a lot. So it's a complicated question, but I would guess concurrent for Chauvin's. We have Todd Trout. Says, do you think the decision by the jury will come down to if the jury makes decision with emotions in consideration or just makes decisions based on the facts? Yeah, I think it's probably going to be a combination of the two, Todd. I think that you're going to see, different personality types in there who are leaning on different justifications and rationales and their fake becauses for why they're going to vote the way that they're going to vote. And so you're absolutely going to have the people who are very highly emotional. And that's sort of the tact that I think the prosecution took, as they should, because they have a more emotional case. We saw a lot of that today. Steve Schleicher and Jerry Blackwell were both out there using a lot of colorful, emotional language that I think will resonate with those types of people on the jury panel. But they also had a lot of facts in there, right? We have a ton of expert witnesses. We had a lot of corroboration. We had some disagreement amongst the government's witnesses, but mostly they were in alignment with themselves. And so, that's going to appeal to the people who are fact-based on the panel. We have HLB in the House says, do you think it's possible for the jury to kind of gather that carbon monoxide would be on the officers, arguably, so would any adrenaline caused by the prone positioning fear of death situation? Or is that kind of out of their bounds when assessing how much damage Chauvin caused? Let me read that one more time. Do you think it's possible for the jury to kind of gather that carbon monoxide would be on the officers? Arguably, so would any adrenaline caused by the prone positioning fear of death situation. So, HLB, I think that the carbon monoxide thing is really kind of a throwaway here. I think that it's sort of... So we've talked about this on the show, right? We talk a lot about this concept called a shiny object. I think that's what that was. The shiny object is the thing that you just kind of throw out there so that everybody talks about. And remember how much time we spent talking about carbon monoxide? And I even thought when this even came out, when Dr. Fowler was testifying, I'm thinking, where the heck did this come from? Carbon monoxide, we haven't even been talking about. Nobody even mentioned that in the government's case. Why is that? Well, they missed it, because they didn't read Dr. Fowler's report and the judge scolded them over that. So it sort of felt like something that was really unrelated. I don't think you need it. Doesn't add anything, doesn't really take anything away, but we spent time on it. The government spent some time on it. So it was kind of the defense shiny object. It's, hey, look over here. Look what we're doing over here. And they did. They bid it. They bid on it. They had Dr. Tobin come back out to rebut Dr. Fowler. And they also had... they mentioned it in closing. It wasn't the car that killed him. So it's sort of to knock them off of their standard routine a little bit. But I think that for Nelson, it is inconsequential. It was all about the other causes in cumulation adding up to being more substantial than Chauvin. Good question, though. We've got CP Miller, WV in the House says, do you think the defense should have pressed that he had held until EMS arrived for safety, since they also waited until they left? Also, the claimed drugs wouldn't have caused it because he was too awake. Well, that could have been what happened as he went and passed out. With the above, he held for safety. Also, guess what? With COVID, we prone our patients to improve oxygenation. So I think the prone, there's argument over the proning position, whether it's, like legitimate prone or not. Do you think that, so yeah, I do think that maybe Nelson, I didn't hear it today. I listened at like double speed today, but Nelson, I think could have probably spent a little bit more time on that concept, right? I think one of the lingering questions that a lot of people are still going to have after closing arguments today is why why specifically didn't Chauvin render more aid? I think a little bit more time on that segment or on that answer would have been good. See the Veil says the prosecution lied during closing argument several times. Since when are prosecutors allowed to lie and make up evidence or selectively edit video, skipping what led the officer to draw the gun? Is this not a cause for a mistrial or disbarment? Well, a lot of that's good to see you, See the Veil. No, it's not a cause for a mistrial or disbarment. Remember, a lot of this stuff was settled before the trial even started. So they have what are called motions in limine about what evidence can come into court. And so a lot of this stuff was fleshed out before that. And so whatever they played today was approved, 4 weeks ago. So at this moment in time, for them playing something that they've already played a number of times, it's not going to warrant a mistrial or a disbarment. You may feel like it's a little bit underhanded, but they're allowed to do that. We have HLB says, would a good takeaway for bystanders be to definitely film officers and maybe keep in mind how to give officers even more space for more options on how to handle what they are handling. Almost like a crowd could help de-escalate a risk or threat. Can't get over that they were in the street the whole time while arguably the crowd was being managed and could have been directed to give space for more options to give medical care. Yeah, so I see what you're saying. So like, would law enforcement be better served by communicating with the crowd in a way to sort of onboard them into assisting you at the scene? I'm sure there's a lot of reasons that the police have as to why that would not make sense. Probably, once a situation goes hostile, it's probably not worth the time to try to flip the scene. It's probably just worth the time to wait until reinforcements arrive. We have HLB says, how do jury questions happen? So they'll typically just round them up. So they'll all ask questions. They'll write it down on a piece of paper. They'll give it to somebody who's managing the deliberation room and the sequester process. Somebody from the court, whoever's assigned to do that, bailiff, court clerk, whatever. And then she'll gather those questions, bring them back up to the judge. Judge will notify the attorneys about them, and then they'll typically, I think they should read them on the record so that we get to see them. And then every time one of those comes out, everybody's going to have a meltdown. What do they ask? It's a lot of fun. Liberty or Death says, thought it was odd that A.G. Ellison did not at least do the closing. I think he was banking on Chauvin testifying. Yeah, the big attorney general didn't seize the mantle and go and deliver the closing arguments, which is the right thing to do, right? That would look super petty, I think, if he did that. Like, you guys do the whole trial, I'm just going to show up. You guys cook the whole meal, but I just want to eat it, right? And it's kind of not good. The guys that that are actually doing, the guy and female, right, who are actually doing the underlying trial, you want to let them have it, I think. See the Veil says there were video clips used by the prosecution that kept showing the underage child. Isn't there a law against that? I don't think so. Just having kids on video, like in a very legal way, I think that's okay. On YouTube, there are problems with that. We have HLB says, I think I saw a thing saying a verdict in 2 hours about an hour ago. Does the head juror person relay a verdict every day at a time so people can just know if they have or have not made one? Not in my experience. It's sort of, they get to it when they get to it. So we're just going to be on notice. We have Ma Fox says, no, people aren't going to like this. I'm going to like it, Mom. I haven't even read it, but I'm going to like it. And I can only do it because I'm not a lawyer. It's most likely Chauvin gets manslaughter. I feel that that's been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, the negligence aspect. You could argue it wasn't the causation, but it's definitely a neglect of duty to custodial charges. That's a fair read, Ma. I told you I was going to like it. I like it. I think that's a very, very reasonable interpretation, right? And the murder, murder versus manslaughter. Yeah, I think it's probably a likely-ish outcome, if I could be candid about that. We have Osak says, Rob, so back in the day, my dad was a juror on the Bob Crane trial here in Phoenix. So my dad and one other was a holdout for a guilty, but the judge stepped in and said, go back until you have a unanimous decision. How can a judge do this? Because that's just how it works. I know, it's crazy, right? The judge just said, yeah, go. No, I know that's what you think, but figure it out. So you go convince them or they can convince you, but you're not leaving. And we're going to see that happen In the Chauvin case as well, HLB says, is this not a solid example of a bad teacher and their trainee in the field? Chauvin apparently was a field trainer for one of the two pups also on Mr. Floyd. How could we find, prevent, and clean out these types of officers? Yeah, we had a bad couple trainees, I think, trainers out there. We had Chauvin on his case. We had Kim Potter on the Dante Wright case, right? I think she was training somebody else. And so that's a good question. I think the answer there is accountability and transparency. We need more of both of those in our law enforcement agencies. The big problem that is impeding a lot of progress in both those areas, the police unions, which are largely garbage. I had, oh my gosh, I saw a tweet the other day that I was going to include, which I forgot about. I'll try to find that. Yeah, but that's the problem. If we have more accountability, more transparency, if we have less unions in place that are propping up bad officers, I think we'd see some dramatic improvements across the country, across our law enforcement agencies. Besse Miento says, I would ask, if George Floyd did not suffer from an enlarged heart, if he had not ingested a high level of fentanyl, would the knee on the shoulder or neck kill him? If not, the Chauvin is not guilty. Yeah, it's a good question, right? I mean, that's sort of what that's what the jurors are going to tell us. They're going to try to tease out some of the causation. We have Farmer's Daughter says, if he is found guilty, do you think he'll have to be put in solitary? Can't see him safe in a prison population. I would say yes, probably, at least for the short term until he finds a more permanent home. You know, normally these things sort of step up in phases. So you sort of will transition over the next month or two. I don't know. Actually, I can't speak to that. I can't speak to how it works in Minnesota. HLB says the 3 other former officers will apparently be charged with accessory. If Chauvin gets charged with just one or all, would they legit all get charged together like in one swift trial? They all already have been charged and their trials are scheduled for the end of the year. I just don't know what order they're scheduled for, or if they're even scheduled simultaneously, or what the deal is with them. I haven't really been paying that much attention to the others yet. We'll see what happens here. We have HLB says, if the jury goes off the facts presented and not the words, then why would shade matter? Why would shade matter? I don't know. I don't know why shade would matter. Justice First says, I like your pie chart. Nelson should have used neck compression goes to 0, according to the 2 pathologists, because no blood flow or airflow was blocked. I still think Dr. Baker was pressured into his wording on the report. Well, Justice First, thank you for the nice little pie chart compliment. I appreciate that. You know, something like that probably would not be allowed to be used in trial. Something like the one I specifically used, because those were just it was demonstrative, right? It was to show you that there are these other things, but you know, it would be totally speculative for me to say, yeah, 10% hypertension, 10% arterial sclerosis or something like that. You know, it's more about communicating an idea, but yeah, Nelson could have used some other demonstrative, tools to communicate that concept. But that specific chart, he could not have used. If he would have gotten rid of the percentages, I think arguably he could have used that. I would have been curious to see what the judge would have allowed. We have Gregory Nicholas said, who paid for Maxine's flight? Can we sue or file some type of audit of misconduct or fiduciary responsibility? Maxine's flight, I don't know. You know, she's probably just been grifting off of the population for so long. She just got coffers of money. Just, you know, it's probably the people of California. It's probably their money. Are they upset that she's in Minnesota making threats that might warrant an appeal and a second trial for Chauvin? HLB says if they can appeal, acquit, or mistrial, or even found innocent, they could go for charging murder level stuff. I don't know, double jeopardy applications or rules, murder level stuff. So they can't try him again just because he's already been tried, right? They can't, unless it's a very, very minor mistrial. If a juror does something wrong, I was reading some rules in Minnesota about some of the mistrial rules, and I think we're beyond that now. I think we're sort of in that safe zone, unless one of the jurors does something totally bananas. But they're sequestered now, right? So they're sort of shielded off in a little bit of a bubble until they reach a verdict. That's kind of the point of sequestration. So I think we're past really the mistrial danger. Anki Woe in the house says the prosecution's closing was too repetitive, repeating the same phrases over and over. While I realized it was done for emphasis, it was overkill and quite frankly annoying. I felt he was overcompensating due to a weak case. Interesting point there, Inkywo, and I actually agree with you. I thought that Steve Schleicher in particular was very, very slow this morning. I was listening at 2 speed and it like felt normal. I mean, he was going, really long pauses and just taking forever to get through it. And it was annoying. Typically, I don't listen to things at 2 speed. I listen to 1.5 or even 1.25 if somebody speaks rapidly, but he was going so slowly. 2 was not even a big deal. And I'm thinking, if I'm a juror, I'm like, can you get to the point? Pick it up, my man. We got some deliberating to do here. Pinky number 2, last question on this segment, says, Rob, do they have standard procedures for training that they make public? Maybe a good idea, especially with these cases. So I don't think so. I think some of that is protected information, of course, for law enforcement security. Like they don't want to tell you all of their training protocols, right? If you're gonna, commit this crime, this is what we're going to do in response to that. Like they don't want to make that available for you, right? That's obviously not good information. But yeah, I mean, there should be some better conversation between the public and law enforcement about how to handle these situations better, whether it's more training, different responses, or what, there's a lot of room for improvement. So I think you're onto something, Pinky, too. And thank you for that nice comment. All right. So those are the questions that came over from locals.com. Check us out at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. If you want to ask a question or be a part of the show, that's the place to do it, at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. All right, so that's it for the Chauvin stuff. We are going to change gears. January 6th feels like an eternity ago. A lot has happened since then, but we just now learned how Officer Brian Sicknick was killed. We were wondering, we've been scratching our heads going, what the heck happened here? Because we know that many people in the media, even the Democrats in their own impeachment trial brief, their memorandum that they submitted in front of Congress, mentioned that Officer Brian Sicknick was killed. He was hit in the head with a fire extinguisher during the January 6th riots. And we saw this hyperventilation all over the media about what a bunch of monsters Trump supporters are. And not just the people who were there at the Capitol building that day, like everybody, all 70-something million of them throughout America. And it's not true. The whole thing is not true. Officer Brian Sicknick was not killed by being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher. Doesn't even look like it had anything to do with the mob that day or any of the rioters. In fact, it sounds like it was a stroke, not just 1, 2 strokes. And so we got to be very cognizant of this, right? Officer Brian Sicknick is not with us anymore. He is somebody who served the country. We want to have as much empathy and compassion for him and his family, for the good work that he did for all of us in this country, as well as grieve and mourn with his family for losing somebody, right? It's awful. Our country has lost a lot of people in the last 12 months. And this is just as awful as all of them, right? Every time somebody dies, it's a catastrophic thing. My irritation with this story is the fact that they exploited this man's death. And if I were his family, I would be so disgusted by our politicians and by the people in this country who exploited his death for their personal gain. It wasn't to honor Brian Sicknick. It was to manipulate his death to their political benefit. They wanted to say, look what our political enemies did to this brave officer, and then they just spun it around and ran with it to the moon. It made it into the impeachment documents that I'm about to show you. So let's take a quick look and figure out what is actually going on here. Article comes over from lawandcrime.com, written by Adam Classfield, posted today. Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick died of natural causes after suffering 2 strokes the day after on January 6th. And we've been wondering where this information has been. Remember, Christopher Wray was hauled in front of Congress. They asked him a question. I cannot confirm or deny anything. All right. They cremated his body. They had his ceremony in the Capitol building. It was an open ceremony. Everybody went over there, and we've been scratching our heads for 3 months about what actually killed him. Well, it's strokes, 2 strokes. He died of natural causes, suffering 2 strokes the day after January 6th siege. First reported by the Washington Post, a newly public ruling was revealed a little more than a month after 2 members of the pro-Trump mob, George Tanios and Julian Cotter, were first charged with assaulting Sicknick by spraying him in the face with chemical irritants. All right, so they were charged with that. They never alleged that the bear spray allegedly used played a role in his death. D.C. medical examiner Francisco Diaz told the Post that the autopsy found no evidence that Sicknick had an allergic reaction to the spray and disclosed to the paper that he did not find evidence of internal or external injuries. Okay, that's not what we were told. Diaz added that Sicknick, having been among the officers who engaged in the Capitol mob, played a role in his condition. His office did not immediately respond to law and crime. Reports release highlights the shifting understanding of the officer's death since the day after the riot. Early reports attributed Sicknick's death to being hit with a fire extinguisher. Investigators subsequently shared their suspicions with the New York Times that a chemical irritant like bear spray may have been to blame. Speculation led some to express surprise that prosecutors stopped short of accusing Tanios and Cotter of causing Sicknick's death, despite charging assault with the chemical spray. Yeah, so they were on the verge of charging these two people with murder. On the verge of it. Didn't happen. Give me that bear stuff, Cotter allegedly told Tanios. In justifying pretrial detention, Magistrate Judge John Alloy avoided the question entirely and spoke only to the suspect's alleged attack on the Capitol. It's too hard for me to look at this as anything other than assault on this nation's heart, Alloy said. All right, these people, so dramatic. Congress held a tribute to the officer, having him lie in honor in the Capitol Rotunda on February 2nd. So this is, you may recall some of the little clips here. Tucker Carlson put a good one together on Sicknick. So here's a little montage of all of the hyperventilating over this.
We'll fight it.
Officer Brian Sicknick died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher during the hours-long attack.
They beat a Capitol police officer to death with a fire extinguisher.
Officer Brian Sicknick died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher during the fight.
He died at the age of 42 after he was bludgeoned with a fire extinguisher.
We'll fight it.
Officer Brian Sicknick.
So we heard a lot about it, and the Washington Post is the original story. He engaged with rioters, suffered 2 strokes. The ruling, released on Monday, likely will make it difficult for prosecutors to pursue homicide charges in the officer's death. 2 men are accused of spraying that bear spray on him. In an interview with the Washington Post, Francisco Diaz, the medical examiner, said the autopsy found no evidence the 42-year-old officer suffered an allergic reaction to chemical irritants. So, no evidence. All right. Said it would have caused Sicknick's throat to quickly seize. He said there was no evidence of internal or external injuries. Medical exam, which is, why wasn't this noted? Why wasn't this noted to us earlier? Medical examiner noted Sicknick was among the officers who engaged in the Capitol mob. He collapsed after returning to his office during the riot, died about 8 hours later. Diaz said he suffered 2 strokes at the base of the brainstem caused by a clot in an artery that supplies blood to that area of the body. Diaz said he could not comment on whether Sicknick had a pre-existing medical condition, citing privacy laws. So, did it take him 3 months to figure that out? Could we have known about that sooner? Or was this useful to them? Let's see what Jeffrey Rosen has to say about it. So this is the acting attorney general, until Merrick Garland gets in there, I think. It says, our thoughts and prayers are with the family and fellow officers of the Capitol Police. Oh, this was his statement back on January 8th. Oh, okay, so that's an old statement. Let's see what they said back then. Who succumbed last night to the injuries he suffered defending the U.S. Capitol against the violent mob who stormed it. They're going to jointly investigate the case to the injuries he suffered defending the Capitol. So that's just not accurate, right? That's not accurate at all. We got over here, we have Frank Thorpe says Capitol Police responds to the medical examiner's findings. We have the medical examiner finds the U.S. Capitol police officer Brian Sicknick died of natural causes. The U.S. Capitol Police accepts the findings from the Office of the Medical Examiner, but this does not change the fact that he died in the line of duty. But it does, though. Yes, but it does. Courageously defending Congress and the Capitol. He didn't die defending Congress or the Capitol. He died of a stroke. 2 of them. The department continues to mourn the loss of our beloved colleague. The attack on our officers, including Brian, was an attack on our democracy. Working with the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI field office, and everybody else. Sicknick, 42, joined in 2008. Julie Cotter was arrested. So was George Tanios for assaulting Officer Sicknick. They're each charged with 1 count of conspiracy to injure an officer, 3 counts of assault, blah, blah, blah. U.S. Capitol Police will never forget his bravery nor the bravery of others. And the family wants privacy. Yeah. So I agree with all of that. I agree that Officer Sicknick's brave. I commend him for protecting the Capitol building. I love all of our good officers in this country who do good work and uphold justice. and a lot of the values that I hold to be dear in America. But he didn't die defending the Capitol building. He died from a stroke, as the medical examiner just said. Good Lord. All right, so not a good situation. We're going to say our prayers for Officer Sicknick. The question being, what took them so long to get this information out to us? This happened back on January 6th. We had the medical examiner apparently come out today, 3 months later. Body's already been cremated. I wonder if it was politically useful to them to let this thing just simmer at a slow boil for political expediency. We got one question in the House from Sharon Quidney. Says, so now that they found that Sicknick died of 2 strokes, what kind of charges are they going to drum up for the political prisoners they're trying to persecute? I can't imagine they would let the truth get in the way of continuing to pursue their political agenda. Well, they're going to have to find a new victim now, apparently. So they'll find somebody else who they can milk for their political narratives. And I thought I posted it's in the impeachment documents. Didn't sync up from my computer, but all right, good questions. That's it for that segment. So if you want to ask a question in any of our segments, the place to do that is at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And we're going to move on. We got one last thing to wrap up today. One final segment. Space aliens. Are they here? The Pentagon is now confirming that these videos we're seeing of these little blobs flying around the skies are in fact legitimate. They are unidentified flying objects. So I saw this clip from Tucker Carlson and a guy named Jeremy Corbell over the weekend, and I did a little bit of digging. I wanted to sort of piece this together, and I wanted to share this with you because we, of course, on this channel are watching the watchers, but there are apparently watchers who are watching the watchers, which are the aliens that might be here. Here's Tucker Carlson from just this past week. And then what I'm going to show you is this video. We have a little bit of an explanation. Then we do a little bit of a deep dive onto Jeremy Corbell and some of the other sightings that we're going to be looking at. And this is not just like a conspiracy segment. Okay, the U.S. Pentagon spokesperson, Susan Go is her name. She came out and confirmed that these images are actually authentic. So I'm going to show you that. And we also know that the Congress is set to be delivered a summary of all of the intelligence agency findings as it relates to UFOs. So that's coming up in June. It's going to be due here soon. Are we going to see it? Probably not. But let's poke around. See if we can find what's going on with ET out there. Here's Tucker Carlson.
Thanks so much for coming on. Tell us where this was shot. What are we looking at here?
Yeah, so I obtained and released videos and photographic evidence of UFOs swarming our warships. So the green video is night vision. That's from the USS Russell. It wasn't just one pyramid-shaped craft. It was multiple. These were swarms. I also released with my mentor in journalism, George Knapp, also released from the USS Omaha, which looks like thermal imagery. He released 3 photos the day prior to mine. So we're trying to get this out to continue elevating the conversation because it's very important we have it right now.
Yeah, so you see this little pyramid thing out there. So this is actually floating around. The U.S. Navy had somebody who was taking imagery through a night vision goggle, probably recorded this on their cell phone. Don't really know the specifics on it, but you saw this little pyramid thing floating around the sky, rotating around right over one of our Navy carriers. And, you know, if you've seen these in the past, you're like, well, whatever, right? That's a balloon. That's something, I don't buy it. Well, the Defense Department confirmed it is real. Here it is over from CNN.com. The Defense Department confirms the leaked video of an unidentified aerial phenomena is real. This was taken in 2019. Defense Department says they are indeed legitimate images of unexplained objects. Okay, so that's the first one. Are they aliens? Well, the Pentagon's not confirming that. They're just confirming that they're unexplained objects. Okay. We have photos and videos of a triangle-shaped object blinking and moving through the clouds were taken by Navy personnel, says, and that was confirmed by Pentagon spokeswoman Susan Go. She gave a statement to CNN. She also confirmed that photos of 3 unidentified flying objects, one sphere, another acorn-shaped, and one characterized as a metallic blimp, were also taken by Navy personnel. And I'm going to show you those here in a second. She said, as we have said before, to maintain operation security and to avoid disclosing information that may be useful to potential adversaries, DoD does not publicly discuss the details of either the observations or the examinations of reported incursions into our training ranges or designated airspace, including those incursions initially designated as UAP, which I believe stands for Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. Excuse me. All right. And so Pentagon spokesperson Susan Goh is confirming it. She also said that the UAP task force, which is the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, was created in August to investigate UFO sightings observed by the military. It has included these incidents in their ongoing examinations. So this is new, folks. Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, created in August, like last year. Navy photos and videos were published by Mystery Wire and On Extraordinary Beliefs last week, but they've been circulating online since last year. There have been a number of reports of unauthorized and or unidentified aircraft entering various military-controlled ranges and designated airspace in recent years, the Navy said in 2019. So what the heck is going on there? Last year, the Pentagon released 3 videos showing unidentified aerial phenomena. Clips the U.S. Navy has previously confirmed were real. U.S. intelligence agencies have been directed to give unclassified reports to UAPs to Congress in June. Okay, so, all right. Let's dig in a little bit further. Let's go over to Jeremy Corbell. We just heard from him on Tucker. Here's what he posted on April 8th. It says the U.S. Navy filmed pyramid-shaped UFOs. On May 1st, 2021, there was a classified briefing, right? So let's put some context around this. Last year, right before the Floyd stuff, right in the middle of COVID, we had a classified briefing that was generated about UFO, unidentified flying objects, and unidentified aerial phenomenon presence via the Office of Naval Intelligence, so the ONI. They generate this briefing. Those familiar with the briefing articulated to me, to Jeremy, that the goal was to destigmatize the UAP problem, the phenomenon problem, and to promote more intelligence collection regarding incursions and encounters with active military deployments. So Jeremy Corbell got a leak from somebody who was privy to this briefing, and this is what they're telling him. The UAP briefing was built on a previous ONI briefing, which is the Office of Naval Intelligence, generated in 2019. Both were distributed across a wide range of intelligence networking platforms like SIPRNet and JWIX and other interlinked systems. I was able to obtain information regarding these and other related briefings, as well as 2 unclassified slides and some of the most intriguing military captured UAP footage I have ever seen. We just saw that on Tucker. So let's go through some of this. Mystery Wire is another website that sort of congregates all of these different claims, and they have independently verified that the visual images obtained by Corbell were prepared by the task force. So they're confirming Corbell. CNN's confirming Corbell, and Mystery Wire is also confirming Corbell. Pentagon responded on Friday last week, April 9th, or 2 weeks ago, for a request to comment on the images. They said, I can confirm that the reference photos and videos were taken by Navy personnel. The UAPTF has included these incidents in their ongoing examinations. As we have said before, to maintain operation security and to avoid disclosing information, DoD does not discuss publicly the details of either the observations or the examinations of reported incursions into our training ranges or designated airspace, including those incursions initially designated as UAP. So we've got a couple things we can consider. You know, is it our government that is testing our own equipment on our own, defenses? Are we doing war games, right? This is not an uncommon thing. We are constantly testing ourselves. We have war games all the time where we're sort of playing with ourselves. The U.S. government is constantly playing with itself. So what is this, right? Is this a foreign power that has hyper sophisticated technology that's sort of poking at us? Or is it actually aliens? Like, are these actual devices and creatures from another world? Or is it just our government, experimenting with some stuff and not telling us about it. Now, you might sort of want to lump yourself into that bucket, but there are some questions then about why our government is concerned about incursions into our training ranges, and they're sort of notifying other people about that, right? Hey, we want to gather more intelligence about this because there are people executing incursions onto our territory, onto our properties. That's a problem. If it's a war game, we don't need to gather information about any of that. So that might lead you to be more in that bucket like this is somebody else. Maybe it's not the U.S. We don't know. Let's go through and take a look at some pictures. We have briefing and event series number 1. This is from Jeremy Corbell. He says, our first one we're going to look at is something that takes place aboard the USS Russell. This unidentified aerial phenomenon event took place July of 2019. Involved Strike Group 9 within warning areas off of San Diego. The USS Russell observed and recorded multiple pyramid-shaped craft. Observations of this encounter series were noted in detail. So you're going to see this is what we're talking about. This is one of those slides from that O&I briefing that Jeremy is privy to. USS Russell observed 3 UNK UAS, seemingly triangular in shape. So 3. It's not just 1, right? 1, 2, 1, 2. We got 1 there. All over the place. Seemingly triangular in shape from the angle of observation, hovering approximately 700 feet over the fantail. 2 of the UASs are pictured above. All right. So that's that. Let's take a look what we have here. Go check them out, extraordinarybeliefs.com. You saw those little pyramids floating through the sky. What the heck were those things? Were those weather balloons? Were those the Egyptian aliens? I don't know. Next event, we've got briefing number 2. This involved the USS Omaha. Observed and recorded a spherical-shaped craft. It was noted that the spherical craft was suspected to be a trans-medium vehicle. Okay, this leads me to believe that it is not U.S., and it might not even be China, unless they have trans-medium vehicles. Was observed descending into the water without destruction. Okay, so it's going from the air into the water at a high rate of speed without exploding. It just shifts mediums. Physical matter almost doesn't matter. It is noted that the spherical craft could not be found upon entry to the water. A submarine was even used in the search. Observation of this encounter series were noted in detail. Here's a slide from that. The USS Omaha observed a possible UAS, spherical in shape, moving towards the surface of the water, then disappearing. OMA assessed the object had sunk. Attempts to search the water for the wreckage were ineffective. So you see this little orb. Let me move myself over there. You can see I just read from this yellow box down here. This orb is, being tracked by whatever technology this is. Just goes right into the water, disappears. Navy goes and tries to find it. Can't find it. It's because it's a trans-medium vehicle. Hello? Our last event series involves an FA-18 pilot and a weapons systems officer on March 14, 2019. The event series took place in the W-72 warning area off the coast of Oceania. Series involves WSO taking personal mobile phone images of UAPs out of the cockpit. So these are pilots, right? FA-18 pilot and a weapons system officer. Intelligence briefing clarifies that they captured 3 different craft on the same sortie with the same cell phone. We have 3 of them. The Acorn UAP, the metal blimp with the payload, and we have the sphere. All right, so let's take a look at them. This first one, this is the metallic blimp. Now see, something like this, it actually looks like a metallic blimp, right? I'm not real sure that this is a space alien. I mean, it could be, I don't know. But it looks like a blimp. Looks like something that we have seen. Now, I am not an airline pilot, a weapons system officer, and I'm also not an FA-18 pilot. Would be cool if I was, though. I would guess that they would know the difference between this and an actual blimp, right? I'm a layperson. This looks like a blimp to me. But I'm going to guess that if you're in an FA-18, probably not used to seeing blimps at whatever altitude or location that they're in. So if that's not the case, what is that? Well, it could be a weather balloon, could be a Russian spy satellite, whatever, right? It could be something that is of this planet. Then we get this little thing. What the heck is this? This is the sphere. Right now, this looks a little bit different. This looks like something that doesn't fly. You know, the blimp looks like, yeah, you fill that with some hydrogen, throw that up in the air. All right. This thing looks like a cell or like a cloud or like something that's kind of looks like a condom, actually, now that I think about it. But it's doesn't look like something that flies, does it? Looks like cloud, maybe. Could be aliens. This last one we have here is the acorn. So let's take a look over here. You're going to notice down here we have this little floating acorn over here. And very far off image, but you can see they're quite high. You can almost see the curvature of the earth up here. So I'm not sure what altitude that is or if there are any other explanations. I'm sure some pilots and people who fly can articulate an alternative explanation, but these are fighter pilots, right? These are people who are up here regularly and they're going, I don't know what that is. So, hey, John, grab your cell phone, take a picture of that. Take a picture of that. Take a picture of that. A little strange. What is going on up there? Who knows? U.S. intelligence agencies, they have 180 days from December. So this is coming up. When President Donald Trump signed $2.3 trillion into law in December, that began 180-day countdown. So Donald Trump is delivering on aliens from the grave. Congress needs to tell, intelligence agencies need to tell Congress what they know about UFOs. The Director of National Intelligence and the Secretary of Defense have a little less than 6 months now to provide the Congressional Intelligence and Armed Services Committees with an unclassified report about unidentified aerial phenomena. It's a stipulation that was tucked into the committee comment section of the Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2021, which was contained in the massive spending bill. Report must contain detailed analyses of UFO data and intelligence collected by the ONI, the Office of Naval Intelligence, the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, and the FBI, according to the Senate Intelligence Committee's directive. Does anybody think that we're going to get any of that data? I certainly do not. It should also describe in detail, quote, an interagency process for ensuring timely data collection and centralized analysis of all unidentified aerial phenomena reporting for the federal government, and designate an official responsible for that process. Maybe they'll put Kamala Harris in charge. Finally, the report should identify any potential national security threats posed by UFOs and assess whether any of the nation's adversaries could be behind such activity, the committee said. So we'll see. We'll see what we get. June is coming up pretty soon here. ET might be here sooner than you think. Let's take some questions over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And we've got our first from Norovira. Rob, you know, you are only looking down the rabbit hole, read this UFO issue. Like 95% of the population. You are not even putting your foot in that rabbit hole. Not to mention sticking that in. Norovira, I'm sure you're going to educate me about the aliens, and I'm looking forward to it. I love these rabbit holes. They're so fun to go down. All right, so Sharon Quidney says, I'm just wondering how much the folks involved have invested in the movie industry. I can see a whole slew of new movies, serials, etc. Let's shake that moneymaker. X-Files 2.0, 3.0, etc. Yeah, I happen to love those TV shows. I'm okay with that. We have Patriot Musk says, Rob, do you think it's wise to reach out to extraterrestrials and bring them to our planet. You know, in 2019, I probably would have said no, probably not a good decision. But in 2021, why not? What else? Let's just, yeah, I think it's a good idea. Why not? What else can they do? What else can they harm? Let's give it a shot. Let's roll the dice. Yeah, all right. Sharon Quidney says, yeah, okay. Unidentified aerial phenomena instead of unidentified flying objects. I guess that's more precise and now includes incandescent swamp gas, meteorites, bolide fireballs instead of implying that they were manned or unmanned manufactured objects. I know it's a lot of possibilities out there in this world. What could it be? We have _shades says it's a UFO, not UAP. Why did they change the name after 60 years? UFO. It's probably some consultant, you know, they probably paid somebody like $100,000 to make that decision. And I'm not even kidding you, right? We have Norovira. Says, maybe I shouldn't have made this comment, but the 5% people know why they are doing this now. Oh, I see where this is going. There's been a plan in place for quite some time to reveal the existence of aliens over the last 10 years and to do it now after the pandemic. This is part of the plan. Slow leaks of info, not to freak people out. Yeah, you know, there's something to that. It is weird, right? Have you noticed that we're having a lot more UFO talk, just in general? It is almost becoming a little bit acclimated. Like Tucker has on somebody who says, hey, the Pentagon just confirmed that there's UFOs here, or UAPs or whatever. And like the big news is Maxine Waters, right? It's okay. We have Anki Woe says, color me skeptic, but I tend to think the convenient release of this is most likely some scheme to distract the public from some other nefarious project they need to petition printing tons of money for to give to the DOD. I think that's probably the most accurate analysis of what's happening here, right? The government is just being the government. The government is governmenting. We have It's Ed said, misdirection. They are just trying to get the public's attention away from something else, probably something the public wouldn't approve of, happens all the time. Yeah, and so you notice that, right? Like you notice that they just dangle things. They throw some red meat out there so that everybody gets fixated on it. Then they pass multi-trillion-dollar spending bills and wreck the public in other ways while we're all focused on whatever happened in Hollywood that day. Liberty or Death says these UFOs are not from our government or any other nation's government. I have it on good authority. They are from Maxine Anus. Oh, yeah. Maxine Anus is the origin story from these UFOs. There's a lot of stuff coming out of Maxine Anus these days. We have Anki Woe, who says, I also think that if there are alien beings that can travel across galaxies, we'd be too primitive for them to be interested in. Most likely, this will be another excuse to implement a mass surveillance program to monitor all of us. Yeah, it's for our own safety. They have to protect us from the fictional aliens, you see? Maybe Dr. Fauci will come out and say, these pyramids are a public health emergency. You need to wear 3 masks. Because the aliens also have COVID and you need to social distance from the aliens. Otherwise, you will die of COVID. Liberty or Death says, looks like the aliens from Kung Pao enter the fist. Which one was that? I can't say I've ever seen that one. So I don't get the reference. I apologize, Liberty. We have Bianca Realty. Sounds like part of the takeover, the Great Reset, printing organs, going to Mars, etc. Very convenient that after all these years, they choose to release these triangles now. Please, yeah. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of that sort of out there. It's like they're leaking little bits of information to us in order to distract us from some of the more pernicious problems. We have Joe Snow says that sphere looks like the dish that appears when the F-35s break sonic barrier. Oh, all right. See, so there you go. Yeah, and that's the question, right? Are there other sort of reasonable explanations for some of these things? The reason why it's easy for me to kind of dismiss the reasonable explanations is because these are fighter pilots. You know, they're flying around the skies. They see a lot of stuff. They know how things move. If you are interested in this, there was a great Joe Rogan podcast back when there was really available on YouTube. I'm not sure if it's available on YouTube now anymore, but he had a great episode with somebody, I can't remember the guy's name, just look it up, Joe Rogan, UFO guy, he comes in and he talks about the pill and about how it was moving so rapidly all over the place. And these are guys with, a decade of fighter pilots experience. And so if they're telling you something's out of the ordinary, it might be worth listening to, and so that's what kind of leads me to be curious about this. Pinky2 says, Rob, what about Roswell? UFOs have been sighted for many decades. This is not new. It's not new, I think, but I think what's new about this is that the government is sort of confirming this, and we have now conversations about it. This is why I'm talking about it. It's because we have a coming up in June, there's supposed to be a report that gets delivered to Congress, unclassified, that details what's going on here. So I think that is new. I think that the fact that our government is sort of opening themselves up to having a conversation about some of this stuff is why this is newsworthy. We have @BeBrave says, are you saying the Biden administration should be transparent? That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that they should, all of our government should. They should all be transparent. Because how can we know how corrupt and broken they are if we can't see inside? They're our government. We are not their subjects. Okay, they operate off our taxes, off our legitimacy. We empower them. So they should be telling us what they're doing, not the other way around. Not like, oh, are you going to give that to us, government? Thank you. We've been very nice here. We've been good children. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing, please? Oh, that's okay. You don't want to tell us this time? That's all right. We'll wait till next year. Okay, thanks. Norovirus says UAP name change is part of a big not freak people out part. Start fresh with new terminology. Oh, okay. Okay. We've got chairman of the board. The last one on the queue for the day says the truth is out there. Watching the watchers. WWTWO. Maybe they're watching this broadcast. Maybe they're coming. Beat me up. I'm ready. All right. Great questions. Good stuff today from everybody over on locals.com. Thank you for that. Thanks for supporting the show and asking great questions. Want to welcome the new arrivals who signed up over the weekends. We've got Newbie of Death. Welcome to the community. We have Leafy Bug. Leafy Bug. Wasn't that from Shrek? Leafy Bug. Was it? I think it was. We have Queen Gorgo. What's up, Queen Gorgo? Welcome. We got Taylor45 in the house. Big welcome to Truth Reigns. We have Paige who signed up. We have the Tea Lover. We have Starscream 1540. And we have Pepperoni who signed up. You can all go and join and support the show at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Big thank you to those of you who asked questions and left great comments today. You know who you are. You're on the list. And as always, I want to say thanks to everybody else who is a part of the community. We talk about building a separate pillar where we can go as people and have conversations with each other, connect with people. You may have noticed that as I have been doing this show, I've gotten to know many of you, right? Many people on this list, I sort of feel like we know each other. Like I know some things about you, and that's the power of community. By creating a different platform over on locals.com, we are sort of insulating ourselves a little bit against some of the other big tech platforms. If YouTube says you're gone, Twitter says you're gone, or if any of these other platforms just say, we're not going to let anybody talking conservatives or free speech or any of those things, they don't want us on the platform. That's all right. We have our own community. We're sort of building things elsewhere. Watching the Watchers is where we are doing that. And that's happening over on our locals community, which is available at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. If you want to check out the community, you can grab all of this stuff. First and foremost is the book, Beginning to Winning. It's a free PDF that's available for download over there at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. You can also check out my slides. All of the slides I went to, you can download those. The impeachment party documents are available. My existence system, personal productivity template is over there. We share links and conversations throughout the day. But the real reason to be over there is the great people. You saw many of them. You heard from many of them today during the show. And so head on over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com, sign up, support the show, get to meet some new people, download a copy of the book, download a copy of the slides, and have a lot of fun while you're doing it. it's a good place to be. And before we finish the show, I got one final thing I want to tell you about. I happen to be a criminal defense lawyer here at the R&R Law Group, where my team and I, we've helped thousands of good people facing criminal charges find safety, clarity, and hope in their cases and in their lives. We're very good at what we do. We have a passion for helping people. So if you happen to know anybody in the state of Arizona who has been charged with a crime, we can help. We help people with DUIs, domestic violence, drug cases, misdemeanors, felonies, old mugshots, old warrants. If you want to restore your rights so you can vote again, so you can possess a firearm again, go apply for federal benefits, go get a house somewhere, or apply for an apartment building without having to check all those boxes off. We can help with all of it, and we offer free case evaluations. We're in Scottsdale, so if you happen to know anybody in the state of Arizona who needs a little bit of help, we would be honored and humbled if you sent them our way so that we could have the opportunity to help. And we'd be forever grateful. And that, my friends, is it for me. Got to figure out what the heck we're talking about tomorrow, since we're not going to have a lot of activity in the Chauvin trial, or will we? We don't know. We never know. But we are going to be back to cover that and more. We're going to be diving into all of it. There's a lot to get to. I know it. So I want to invite you to be back here with us tomorrow at that time. Same place, same time, 4 p.m. Arizona, which is the same time in California, 5 p.m. Mountain, 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. in Texas, in East Coast in Florida for Florida Man. Everybody, have a tremendous night. Sleep well. Have a hearty, healthy dinner. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.